Hello there, everyone. I am Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of BeatingTrauma.com. And I am here to talk to you today about fear of visibility. This is a big one for a lot of us, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that is. But I want to welcome you to my live stream. I'm here every Tuesday at noon Eastern time, and I talk about another topic of healing our trauma and really being able to walk through life learning what's happening to us every day. It's like sort of, for me, awareness is such an important concept in our trauma healing. It's like meditation for daily life in a sense. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about those thoughts that are in our head, but they're awfully maybe unconscious, so we don't really notice them so much. This is where we're going to discuss those and help bring those more into our awareness than normal. To get started on today's topic, it's about the fear of visibility, and more so it's about how the fear of visibility can hold us back. But then in addition to that, it's about what we could do about it. Like, how can we make that more like obvious to our awareness so that when we can then address it, right? Like, so that's ultimately the goal with this discussion today. One of the things I have learned probably more than anything else in this journey is that our deepest fears are absolutely 100% directly tied to our biggest gifts. Okay. As a matter of fact, the reason we can struggle our whole life to understand what our gift is or what our purpose is or all of those other words that get used is because we have spent a childhood having those things sort of put out of our conscious awareness. And I find that this happens a tremendous amount when we have significant trauma, that the trauma itself, that the experiences that build the fears in us specifically target our gifts. And I'm going to go into a few reasons why that happens actually. Because it is a pretty good explanation for that happening. But one of the things is if we grow up in a home where there is a significant effort to break the child, the expression of our gifts, can be something that exudes confidence and happiness and a whole lot of other things that are considered threatening or dangerous to families who are abusive. Right. So that's one of the biggest reasons why those particular things are targeted. And you may be thinking, but I wasn't expressing my gifts as a child. And I am here to tell you, yes, you were. It's not that you were expressing it in its final adult form, but you were expressing it because you can't help it. As a child, you're going to express your gifts. They're just going to come out very naturally. You're not even trying. But as that happens, your family kind of is like, oh no, this is too much. This is too much exuberance or too much excitement or too much confidence or too much happiness. We can't let this continue. And there's a reason for that. I'll talk about it in a minute, but it has to do with projections. So what that means is when we have a significant fear of visibility, we are also meant to be visible in some way, right? So our fears are directly tied to actually what we are supposed to be doing. And that's why we hear, and I think there's a pretty popular phrase out there in spiritual communities that says, go through your greatest fear to get where you're supposed to be. Like that concept. I'm not quoting it exactly. I am really bad at quoting quotes, by the way. You'll notice this about me. So I'll just apologize ahead of time for all the times I have completely destroyed quotes. So now, when I say visibility, I also want to clarify that I'm not necessarily saying you're going to be famous. Visibility can be much more subtle than just being about being famous, okay? And especially in today's world where we are so inundated with all of these like social media, concepts out there, different types of venues for exploring our expression, so to speak. So sometimes visibility can just mean expressing to a very small number of people, but it's a very key number of people. So Again, visibility doesn't have to mean I'm out there and the whole world knows who I am. Visibility could be smaller than that, but our fear of it can still get in our way in a significant way, right? So I want to say hi to Jan. Thank you for being here. So the other point I want to make, and this does come back to this idea of gifts, is that the fear of visibility is very often combined with some form of authenticity within us. So this is where visibility gets a little nuanced, because you may be really good at being visible, but not when you're talking about anything authentic. I used to be able to stand up and speak about almost anything. I was really good. I've always been a pretty good public speaker. When I was in college, I did struggle to get A's a little bit, not in public speaking, but I would speak about things that didn't really truly matter to me, not in a really significant way. I kept myself pretty safe with my visibility. Also, it was like a class of 20 people, right? Who I wasn't going to keep knowing. I went forward because I was at a really big college. So that visibility, both that it was smaller numbers of people that I didn't care how they felt about me, at least within reason, because all of us would probably care how people feel about us, but also it was about things that wasn't super connected to. I wasn't being authentic in my public speaking. I was just speaking, right? So that made it a little easier. It's why when we start exploring our gifts, we can struggle more to put ourselves out there than maybe we did before we really started getting authentic and purposeful in what we were communicating. So, as I've mentioned so far, this idea of visibility has a lot going on with it, right? It doesn't mean we're famous. But it often does ratchet up as we begin to explore more authentic ways of existing in the world. Okay. So that's really important. Now you may be saying, so great. So if I want to express my gifts, I'm basically just going to be stuck. And I'm here to tell you, no, that is not the case. There are ways to get past it. And I'm speaking from very personal experience. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to help ourselves become more visible. And one of the best ways we can work with visibility and build our ability to be visible, especially in our most authentic ways, is to express from our fears. Now, this is where I start getting into writing. As you all know, that's my thing. That's what I do. Writing specifically from our fears. Okay. That's really what we want to target. But you might be thinking, okay, great. Like, I don't know what my fears are around visibility exactly, because all I know is that when I try, my mind blanks, or I distract myself, or I just totally sabotage what it was I was trying to do, and then it doesn't happen. But I don't really have a good sense of why. Trauma in the unconscious sits there. It bites us, but we don't know what's going on. We're just like, why does this keep happening? Why is this pattern the same? Every time I try to build visibility, I sabotage it. I don't have any idea why. What's going on, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that I have some ideas about why. And I am a bit of, I guess you could say, the writing prompt queen. That's sort of what I do. Okay, I'm a queen in my own mind, maybe. But the prompts help us to dig into the unconscious a little bit better, because we often don't know exactly what the fears are. As a matter of fact, the controller and the karma kid, who are the two parts that sabotage visibility the most, will often like come at us in some pretty logical ways. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that, or that's not a good idea because of some very logical reasons. So we're like, it doesn't sound like a fear, but underneath it, those fears are there. So what are some of the fears we might have? I'm going to throw these ideas out to you. I would say you want to listen for the ones that resonate the most with you. However, you may also want to listen for the ones where you have the biggest objection to it existing within you. Because to be honest, oftentimes those defenders will be like, no, 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 we're not writing from that, which actually means I want to do some writing from that, actually. So let's talk about this a little bit. Okay, the first one I have is the fear of rejection and abandonment. Now, this one might go without saying. Oftentimes, the fear of rejection and abandonment is a fear that is applied to the people we know today. This can be particularly true with family members, especially when we have this whole history already with these family members rejecting some of our most authentic expressions, right? So this fear of being authentic and being visible can really show up around family members and those that we've known, especially if we've known them for a long time. And so, in other words, and I am gonna speak more about this at the end, a lot of these fears are things that will manifest as we become more authentic and visible. I'm going to talk to you about how we work with that. But the first thing we want to do is write from the fear. Excuse me. By the way, my throat issues are actually a part of my fear of visibility. And they come and go as I get more and more authentic. So this is why this is so near and dear to my heart, because I am just dying for the day when there's no more throat issues. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. So the next one on the list is the fear of criticism. Now, this is often about people we don't know, but it can be about people we know too. And the truth is, the fear of criticism, the criticism from people we don't know who see us become visible and authentic in some way, that is almost a guarantee. Okay, we are going to experience this. So again, this fear is reasonable and likely to happen. Okay. But the fear of criticism of people we don't know is something that we can do some writing from as well. So just writing from, these people are going to like it. They're not going to like what I have to say. I can tell you the first time I put a blog out there that was about inner parts, I actually fully 100% believed that I would like people were going to come with the straitjackets and take me away. And you know what I got instead? I got a whole lot of people going, my gosh, I can totally relate to that. So while yes, there were people who criticized me, there still people that don't like what I say, they haven't harmed or damaged my direction towards my authentic visibility one little bit. We're going to talk more about that. So the next fear is the fear of visible failure. Okay. There's already going to be that fear of failure in our system. That's already going to be there no matter what, because in most traumatic households, failure is absolutely unacceptable, which can lead us to establish survival skills like perfectionism, but also a survival skill of just never really doing much of anything or never completing anything, because we realize that no matter what, it's not going to work out, or it might work out, but we can't take the chance that it won't. So we develop these survival skills, and they play into the visibility as well, because when visibility happens, then there's not just a chance of failure, which is already unacceptable, but now there's a chance that people will see you fail, right? That's even worse. So writing from the fear that you will go out there, you will put yourself out there, and it won't work. Okay. That feels really intensely scary to a lot of trauma survivors. And I know this one also from personal experience. I'm like, oh, I have this great idea. Maybe I should do it. And then I hear, but what if it doesn't work? And I literally haven't even done anything. I haven't even written the first word, because most things when I have ideas, I need to write. And it's like already, what if it doesn't work? What if people don't like it? What if it doesn't sell? What if it's a failure? What are you going to do then? How are you going to explain that? Right? That's what starts in my system almost immediately as soon as I start considering creating something new. So this one is there for so many of us. Really, it is. So the last fear I want to talk about today gets a little bit darker. And by the way, they're not just 4 fears that we are faced with invisibility, but these are the 4 that really came to me that I wanted to mention. The last fear is darker, and it is the fear of death. And the truth is, I honestly believe this, that every single fear we have in our system is actually tied to this fear in some way. Not because it makes logical sense, okay? Like, they did that study one time that said, what are your greatest fears? And the fear of public speaking was above the fear of death, right? How does that make sense? Because The fear of public speaking is directly tied to the fear of death, not because people are that illogical. Like, they literally think that public speaking will cause their death. And here I am talking about why. Okay, so the fear of death is tied directly to visibility. This can happen for many reasons, but it often has to do with, like, we start getting into really like family histories and generational traumas and all sorts of really yucky, dark past stuff. Like, the biggest one is when we talked about the fear of rejection. Remember, when you were a child, you did not have the ability to survive as a child without a family. It's not possible. You can't go get your own apartment and start making your own money and get a job, right? You can't do those things. So there's already a link between the fear of abandonment or rejection and death. It's about childhood, right? It's not about adulthood. We're going to talk more about that in a second too, by the way. So this fear of death is tied to that. This fear of death is also potentially tied to the fear of failure. Because if you fail, you may have found, if you grow up in a physically abusive, that when you failed, like, the consequences were very, very intense. And the truth is, when you're facing an abusive parent, you don't know they're going to stop. You don't know when it's going to end, and you don't know how far they're going to take it. How can you know that? You're not in their head, right? So there can be fear of death associated with a lot of physical violence, even if as adults we may look at that and go, well, that's just a punishment. It might not be to a child, right? So we've got the fear of death tied to those. Then in addition to that, we're talking about the fact that oftentimes in families, your gift has existed for generations in those families. This, by the way, is one of the only places where I even consider DNA as a thing that matters. Like, I like to say I'm a big environment bigot in the scheme of things. I always vote for environment over biology almost every single time. You don't have to agree with me. That's just where I'm at with it. But in this case, there does, I think, really is a link in families with what our gifts are. Now, that doesn't mean that your generations before were actually expressing those gifts, which is kind of the point. Oftentimes in like generations past, these gifts, there may have been attempts to express these gifts that did not go well. And while we may live in a society sometimes, depending, that doesn't punish gifts with things like death, we have not always lived in a society that didn't punish gifts with death. I mean, I always come back to the witch trials. What kind of feminine expression was trying to happen there that wound up with a bunch of dead women, right? Well, like now, when these women who have been through all this generational trauma, when they tried to explore their feminine gifts that were labeled witchcraft and then they died, are not going to be really big on letting their kids express their intuitive abilities. Now, that's an extreme example, but it's also not, because it really happened, right? So we want to really look at how has my family, my family's ancestry attempted to express these same gifts before and been found to be outcasted or experienced an early death or things of that nature. Because the truth is, back in the day, outcasted did mean potentially an early death, right? So we want to validate this fear of death, not because it necessarily can happen today, but because it could have happened and maybe even did happen in the past, okay? That's the validation of our fears is one of the number one ways that we begin to address them and work through them. So again, validating the fear because it was likely to be true in childhood and it was likely to be true maybe in past generations, and that fear is still sitting there in the family, in the system, affecting our interactions with each other and how we express our gifts, okay? But there's another side to this, which is that the visibility journey isn't really about saying, oh, that fear used to be true, but that fear is not true now. Okay, because many times with visibility fears, it is actually still true now. I don't know if you guys have seen a Taylor Swift documentary lately, but the truth is, when people get visible, they get attacked. No, not necessarily physically like used to happen, although There have been instances of things like stalkers and stuff in famous people's lives, for sure. But it's more about that fear being something that we can deal with in a different way as adults than we could as children, okay? It impacts us differently, right? So what I mean by that is, yes, people may actually abandon and reject you. People may actually attempt to sabotage you as you move towards whatever it is you're supposed to authentically express in some visible way. People may actually criticize you, right? These are potentially real fears that will really happen. But where the fear goes wrong is when it tells us that has some kind of power over us, okay? Because it doesn't. We are now adults. We now have power. We now have options. We can do things we could never do as a child. That's the mentality we want to change. So again, we're not trying to throw these fears away and say they're garbage and they're never going to happen. Honestly, even if we try to do that with our parts, they're not going to buy it. They're not going to know we're full of it because these things happen every day. See it happening every day. People attack people who seem to be successful and visible because largely they're jealous. That's why it happens. But then the question becomes, does it matter anymore? And that's what we have to keep coming back to, right? Can I sit in my power and express my authenticity in a visible way and experience criticism, rejection, abandonment, sabotage, all the things, but have that not matter to me anymore? This is where we want to go as human beings. Honestly, it is the only way to live a peaceful life. Otherwise, if we're hiding our authenticity and we're going to be constantly at odds with ourselves, we're not going to be in a very peaceful place. Or if we're out there in the world and we're expressing our authenticity in a visible way, but we still care what these people are doing and what they think, we will also not be at peace. So most of human beings on this planet are in one of those two places, I'll be honest. So our goal is to work with the inner fears that tell us, oh my God, this is going to be the end of the world if we express this and we face criticism. This is going to be a disaster. Right? So, because no, it won't. But I get that our inner parts think that because of their experiences, right? So Jan is saying, this is so insightful. I never heard an explanation for the way I felt about being visible as a speaker lecturer. Voice telling me I am a fraud, yet speaking to a packed room. This is so helpful to understand. Yes. So that message of I am a fraud, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm going to be awful at this, that's often the karmic shame coming forward, right? But underneath that shame is the fears I was talking about today. Like that's what lives under that shame. The shame, the controller's logic saying this doesn't make sense. What's your goal? You're not going to make any money at this. There's no reason to be doing this. Where is this going? It's not going anywhere. Like just stop. Okay. So we got controller saying those things. We got karmic kid saying you're fraud. And both of those messages are hiding what I've been talking about today. Because it's always there, but it's usually underneath, right? Underneath those other things that we're hearing. So when we write from you're a fraud, or we write from this doesn't make logical sense, why are you doing this? We start to delve into some of those deeper fears that are under there, right? That's so important. And Carol's saying the fear of death, that's ridiculous, right? It sounds so ridiculous, but wow, got me crying for sure. Definitely got to write from this. Exactly. Like, it's like, you think about it, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Why in the world would I be afraid that I would end up dead over this? But when you start really digging into those fears and those inner parts, it is pretty amazing the perspectives that can come up. And honestly, when you start really looking at the trauma you experienced as a child, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. I've been digging into this one for a really long time because every single fear I've been able to express from seems like it has always come back to this. And I wholeheartedly believe that it's there. It's like foundational and it lives under almost everything that we're dealing with, including that study. Let's study that where people said the fear of public speaking ranked above the fear of death. it's because they're one and the same, right? Now, that's something to chew on, right? So if there's one thing I don't do, I don't speak like a surface level. This is my authentic visibility showing up here. I have a tendency to go pretty deep, but we are all going to need to go there eventually to get to who we are really meant to be here on this planet at this time. We've got to move past the fear of death, and that means we have to write a whole lot from it, unfortunately. I'd love to skip that part, by the way. I also think it's kind of amusing that I actually teach stuff that I would rather not do myself, but I'm very passionate about how well this does work when we get past those defenses and start writing from the fears. So, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your comments and your contributions there. I look forward to talking to you guys next Tuesday. Join me then, and I will see you all really, really soon. Bye.